or jot of the Lisbon Treaty has been altered. So that means that the treaty that was voted down in June 2008 because of concerns around workers' rights, public services, neutrality, we know the big core issues, that the government simply set aside those concerns, sat sort of De Valera style, looked into its heart, pondered things for a while, and then at the 11th hour cobbled together a set of very formal sounding, very legalistically formulated words, along with their partner governments. But their elaborate statements amount to nothing. So the guarantees aren't in fact guarantees at all. The guarantees in reality are socks, or they're camouflage, or they're a decoy for public opinion to give the impression that this government took heed, listened to the people, and acted on the very clear mandate that the people gave to them. That's their story, but we're not fooled by that for one moment. And I don't believe, friends, that when this debate gets up and running and when people come to vote again, that the people of this state will be fooled either. Lectures on democratic standards and democratic values from the poster boys and the poster girls of the blue shirts and Fianna Fáil and the Greens and so on. I wonder now if they're capable of any level of self-analysis. I wonder now in any way do they question that whole notion of democracy for themselves. Because we saw at Nice, and now we see again, that when the government doesn't get the answer it wants, it sets that answer aside. So much for the sovereignties of the people. But we also know that the Irish government is not unique in taking this position, because in other European jurisdictions, leaders have done exactly the same thing. We saw it with the French and the Dutch vote. We've seen it at times with Danish votes. So this is very much standard and true to form, but it's just not good enough. We're told very often that Irish people are somehow uniquely cranky in our view of the European Union. You know, that we're just awkward. Let's just nail that one here. Because in fact the record reflects that since the early 1990s, people all across the European Union have become increasingly critical of the EU and its policy direction. It was seen first with Maastricht and what was known as the petit oui in France, and of course the Danish rejection of that same treaty. And since the early 90s, in different countries, the people have revolted against the master plans of the European project as conceived by the great, the good, and the vested interests. So this Lisbon referendum is extremely important. It's important that we reject this treaty, firstly because it's a bad treaty. It's a bad treaty in a long succession of bad treaties, and it needs to be rejected for that reason. But maybe more importantly, it needs to be rejected because the political establishment here and across Europe need to understand that the European project can only advance in a manner and at a speed mandated explicitly by the people. The politicians need to understand that this project needs to be the people's project and that citizens need to be in the driving seat. And their past behaviour shows us that they're not really open to that message. So we kind of have to force and drive that message home. So in seeking to defeat, and our campaign is about creating the possibility that we can in fact shift the direction of the European project and move it to a place where it serves the needs and interests of citizens, not big business or vested interest either. So, let me just address maybe some of the guarantee items that I think will feature most in the campaign. I'm going to start with the Commissioner, because as you know, this is the one that has been trotted out most regularly. They say to us, well, you know, what's your problem? You gave out that we weren't going to have a commissioner, now we have a commissioner. And that sounds okay until you actually examine the facts, because the reality is that we have a decision which says that member states will have a commissioner. It's a decision that could be overturned by another decision. That's what they don't tell you. And by the way, it's a decision that will be overturned by a subsequent decision, because you see, the Lisbon Treaty says that we're going to have this slimmed down commission. I start with that example not because for me that's the most important issue, but I start with it because I think it is the most likely one to be trotted out most regularly. I also cite it because it just gives you a sense of the kind of cynical politics that's being played. On the issue of neutrality, they'll say, well, this is the old chestnut, the most sensitive issue for people in this state. You wanted us to sort out the issue of neutrality, we've sorted out. And these words tell you so. They tell you that nothing at an EU level affects our status as a military neutral, or the specific, the specific characteristics of our policy. So job done. So says Pat Cox. Job done. The reality, of course, is very different. What you have is a political declaration on neutrality, an assertion. It says there's nothing in this treaty that damages your position as a neutral. But you see, the difficulty is that the treaty clearly states a deepening of the relationship between the European Union and NATO. It clearly states that more and more resources must be dedicated to weaponry. It clearly says that the era of independent foreign policy is drawing to a close. Now, how on earth can you tell any neutral state that these provisions do not critically undermine neutrality? You simply can't. It's a contradiction in terms. But the government will hide behind the words and the assertions that have been made by their partner governments. Our job is to set out the facts. I think, though, the most brazen example of their cynicism is in the area of workers' rights, public services, and what's called social Europe.